All right. Hi to everyone who's joining us. This is another Conversations with Women in Wellness, where I get to introduce all of you to a female professional with a heart to serve others and talk a little bit about what it is that they do, who they support, and what resources they may have available for you to explore. I'm Britt Reuter, and I'm a functional medicine nutritionist serving women experiencing gut issues, hormone imbalances, and autoimmunity. I run an online virtual clinic from my home in the Boston area. And if you want to learn more about me and what it is that I do, you can visit my website at www.brittreuter.com or find me on Facebook or Instagram at Nutrition Brit. Today, my guest is my friend and colleague, Annette Sloan. Annette is a life coach for sensitive souls specializing in food freedom coaching, general life coaching, and surrender coaching for solopreneurs. In all three areas, she helps sensitive women and men to get rooted and resilient so they can transform their challenges with courage, consciousness, and compassion. Annette has a bachelor's degree in human communication from the University of Denver and a coaching certification from the Institute for the Psychology of Eating. She's based in Colorado, but she works with clients all over the world, one-on-one, through her virtual book club. You are the one you've been waiting for. Thanks so much for joining me here today, Annette.
Thank you so much, Britt. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to share the work that you do with my clients, and I know that we're going to have a great conversation today. So I'd love it if we can start things off with you sharing what it is that you do as a life coach and who you're most passionate about helping.
Well, as we were talking about when we chatted just a few minutes before you started the recording, over time, I've become more and more refined in knowing who I love helping the most and who I'm best at helping. And where it really is right now is sensitive souls. So I've been in this business now for almost 5 years, and I started out with the food freedom coaching being my main thing. And over time, as I did that, I started to realize, well, the food and body challenges are just a doorway into life challenges, into, not being rooted and connected with ourselves, and with this invitation to develop more resiliency skills so that we can show up in our lives with more courage and consciousness and compassion. So recently I rebranded my business just about a month ago as Life Coach for Sensitive Souls, and I'm still doing the food freedom coaching, but along the way I also just sort of brought the brand up to date with what I've been doing. So the surrender coaching for solopreneurs is something that has been happening because helpers and healers and other kind of heart-centered, spiritually based coaches were approaching me and asking, like, I've seen you share some stuff about your journey in building your business in this very non-traditional way. Will you help me with that? And then also the life coaching, it just kind of fits right in there, when people are feeling stuck or lost or kind of tired of their own BS and feel like they can't get out of their own way. So all three of them, although they seem different, they're really doorways into the same inner work of getting rooted and resilient.
Wow. Yeah, no, I can totally see how it isn't so much bucketed. It's, a lot of crosstalk between all those different areas.
Right. Yeah.
So you're pretty open about being a sensitive person, and you describe how you used to use food as a way to buffer tough emotions. What were some of the first steps that you took in learning to sit with these feelings versus managing them with food?
I think that's a great question. And I really had to think about it because you sent me this question in advance and I was like, what was it? Because I have changed so much. Like back when I was really struggling with emotional eating and binge eating, I had no consciousness or awareness really that that's what I was doing, that I was eating because I didn't know how to feel tough feelings. I just knew that sometimes this overwhelming urge to eat a lot of food as quickly as possible, to inhale it until I was in like a food coma state, would just come over me. And I hated it. I hated myself when I was doing it. And yet I couldn't stop. It was like something would take over. I felt out of control. Yeah. And it took a while. It took sort of the realization of two things that helped me to get that first step, which I think was developing self-compassion. And one part was realizing like I had this identity back in college in my early 20s that I wanted to be a perfect healthy eater. And so I had ideas about, okay, that means I follow these food rules, and that means also I exercise in this way. And I just want to be that girl that everybody looks at and thinks like, wow, she's got it together. She's so healthy. I did a good job in a way, because a lot of people saw me that way. Because, in my head, I had this idea that somehow that would make me more worthy in the eyes of the world, because that's the message that our world tends to put out there. And I bought into it. So I realized that actually my perfect healthy eating, all my rules and stuff, mean that I'm restricting my food intake. And when I learned that binge eating is a natural and expected response to food restriction, that helped a lot, because it's it wasn't just something that was wrong with me. It was my biology and my psychology trying to balance out the restriction that I was doing. So that helped me to develop self-compassion. And then so did the awareness that when I started to realize I'm just a sensitive person, a sensitive soul who hasn't quite figured out how to navigate this world, doesn't quite have the toolkit yet to be in this really messy world in a always healthy way. Then I was like, oh wait, so I'm actually just trying to do something kind for myself in those moments when I'm turning to food as a way to soothe myself. And that realization also helped me to develop that self-compassion, because it's you're not just this out of control monster. You are this, there's a part in you that just wants to make you feel better. And then there's also this other part that is trying to balance out this imbalance that you've created. And the realization of both of those things helped me to release so much of the shame that I was carrying around, which made space for self-compassion, and also made space for me to start to feel all those tough feelings that I couldn't feel before, because I was just so weighed down and so overtaken by shame all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you say that, it's almost like breaking down that resistance to those, and the judgment that you carry towards those feelings by validating, when I do this, it's only natural that my reaction be to binge. It's only normal, and kind of validating that and releasing the judgment, which led you to self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's a great summary.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's so cool. And I think that, from the women that I work with and, friends of mine, and just my own experience being a woman, like you're saying, the pressure to, conform to society's standards. I mean, it's very toxic and rampant culture. So it's something that I think every woman listening to this is going to be able to understand. So I just really appreciate you, being so vulnerable and sharing that with all of us, because I know, like I said, everyone's going to be, nodding their head along with us. Yes, that's my story too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so freeing when we start to realize, oh, but it's not my story because of something that's wrong with me. It's because ever since I was born, this the world has been telling me, well, you're supposed to be pretty and you're supposed to be thin, and that's your job. Make yourself those things. I love somewhere on social media I saw that the greatest act of rebellion is to just love yourself, which I love, because it's fun to be rebellious sometimes, but we don't always think about that in the radical self-acceptance light, like you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah. So I've been following your work for a while, a couple of years, and I know that you talk a lot about intuition. How would you define intuition, Annette, and how do you think that women can begin to reconnect with theirs?
Well, I think intuition, there's so many ways to see it, but it's the gut feeling, it's the inner knowing, it's the maybe it's the greater consciousness, maybe it's the voice of the universe or God. There's so many ways to see it depending on our perspective and our faith and spirituality. But I think at the end of the day, it's something that we all have. And many of us, though, in our culture are really disconnected from it, because it's this thing that arises when we're in sort of a relaxed, like a parasympathetic nervous system state, when we're in our right brain. And both of those things are not things that our culture, you know, puts as like makes a priority or encourages us to do.
Right.
So we're so left brain dominated, and there's such an imbalance there, and we're always often running in sympathetic nervous system. So it's like we can't slow down to hear it. But when we start to realize like, oh, this way of life of being running and stressed all the time and trying to do everything by facts and logic, like I think life starts to show us, and we can call it our intuition or something else, but whether it's just feeling unhappy or unfulfilled, or whether it's certain areas of our life, like professionally or a relationship or whatever it may be, just kind of blowing up. It's like, it's the world showing us, the universe showing us like, hey, there's something to pay attention to here. There's a way here in which you're not following your knowing, or you're not in alignment with your true self. And there's nothing to judge, nothing that we're doing wrong, but just something to look, oh, okay. So maybe I want to look at this differently, get curious about it. And I think the root, sometimes we have to take that path of torment, especially if we're just like really not tuned in, then it's like the universe loves us enough to be like, okay, well, if you're not going to pay attention to these little nudges, I'll show you in a bigger way because I want you to get the message.
Yeah.
But if we are aware enough to hopefully, not let it get to that state, then I think the path to tapping into our intuition more is, practices like yoga and meditation come to mind, but even those I think can seem a little overwhelming if we're really not used to quieting the mind.
Sure.
So then I would say even just the smallest things, like let's not think straight of like, okay, how do I get quiet enough to hear my intuition? But what if we take the middle step of how do I connect with my body?
Mm.
And as we start to do that, as we start to take a few deep breaths throughout the day, or as we start to eat more mindfully, or just stretch a couple times a day, or even those smallest of things, when we start to feel into our body presence instead of just being so present in the mind all the time, I think that also smooths the way to be then when we're present in our body, we're present here and now, and that also makes it easier to then get in touch with our intuition.
That's just such a practical way to break it down, because it can seem really intimidating. I know something as abstract as intuition, and for a lot of us that are kind of stuck in the left brain, you just want a really clear, roadmap, like just tell me the steps and then I'll do it. And that's, I like your idea of having that middle ground and just, reconnecting with your body and starting there. It's so approachable the way that you laid it out.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of the work that you do is so needed because of the pressures that just society in general, and maybe like the beauty industry and health and wellness industry possibly put on women. What would you say is one thing that women who are listening to this conversation can do today to resist that constant pressure that the diet and beauty industries put upon them to feel less than?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question.
Yeah.
And I think the answer lies in, like, the biggest thing we can do is really educate ourselves about what's happening and how these diet and beauty and wellness and health industries often also they're billion-dollar industries. They're using the most sophisticated psychology tactics that exist, right? They have big teams that they can find, like, what is the most effective way to get into people's heads to get them to believe that they're not good enough so they will buy our product. Like, when we really start to understand that that's what's going on, one, it probably makes us angry. But two, it starts to free us, because we're like, oh, right. So I am a product of my culture and my conditioning, but that's not really me. And then we're like, okay, so there's nothing wrong with me. And I think that the more, that's not like a one and done kind of thing, but it's just levels of like, oh, starting to understand more and more and more, how prevalent it is. And, yeah, it becomes really empowering and freeing. And I like specific, action steps too. So in terms of how to do that, have you seen the documentary Embrace?
I have not. No, I've been wanting to watch it.
Highly recommend it. It's on Netflix.
Okay.
And it's this just powerful documentary about body image and about the beauty industry and weight and all the expectations on women.
Oh, sounds great.
Yeah. So that's one very practical, easy thing to do to start to educate yourself on all these, on this world. And then the book Health at Every Size. Have you read it?
Yes. I think that you had shared it.
Yeah.
Was it in your book club?
A couple years ago. Yeah. Yes. And that is one by Dr. Linda Bacon. And it really, it goes into all of like just the stuff that it's making me mad now that I think about it again. But even things like, Dr. Bacon was working on her PhD about body BMI and those sorts of things as so one day she's working on her PhD, she's super immersed in all of the research. And then one day she wakes up and she sees the news and she sees that all of a sudden they've changed the limits and they've made the BMI measurements for healthy weight and overweight and obese, they've lowered them all. So a whole bunch of Americans went to bed one night and they were considered in the normal rate range. They wake up the next day and the numbers have changed and all of a sudden they're overweight.
Right.
And she started to dig and eventually came to realize the science doesn't support those numbers changing. But what was happening was that there was an industry behind it,
wow,
a pharmaceutical industry that runs one of the obesity associations that is a big contributor to their money. And there was some encouragement there to change the numbers because if more people believe that there's something wrong with their body and that they're overweight or obese, and then we'll go looking for solutions to that, that company makes money.
Right. Yeah. And just how profit, driven that is, it's not out of care or compassion or concern, for those individuals, because like you point out, they went to bed and they were healthy and they wake up and all of a sudden, they're no longer what's considered to be healthy. It is really sad. And I agree. Every time I think about those things, I feel like that sense of indignation, and anger well up, just because, not only just for how it, I'm sure you feel the same way, where it's not just how it impacts you, as a woman in society, but, as, in the positions that we're in, we have so much compassion and empathy and sympathy for the clients that we support, and just seeing how these toxic images hurt them, is kind of a whole different layer of anger.
Yeah.
You just want to be protective.
Yeah. And it's not just beauty and diet industry too, but it's like the medical industry.
Yeah.
Most doctors have no idea how to have a healthy conversation with patients that takes around nutrition. First of all, they don't know a lot about nutrition in general, as you know, right? And there's no awareness of there's this whole relationship with food piece. And there's so many stories of doctors shaming patients in the way they talk to them about food and weight and diet that causes so much harm.
Right.
And yet doctors are seen as the experts and the first people we're supposed to listen to.
Right. That reminds me of an example. Recently I was working with a client who, was told by her doctor, the next time I see you, I want you to weigh 20 pounds less. And that, was just so hurtful, to her, and so disempowering. So I saw a woman who, felt like at first, before that appointment, there's so much that I can do to love and care for my body. I want to nourish it, with these healing foods and, love myself and do things that I enjoy, take fitness classes that I enjoy or spend time walking with friends that I love. And just, after that I think, toxic conversation, with her healthcare provider, just how out of sync, that threw her, and how much work it ultimately took her to get back into that place where it's like, I can love my body, at any size, at any weight, and I'm going to continue to do these things to honor and show respect for my body. It was really frustrating for me to see, her hurt in that way.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure you've heard those stories, many times.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you find that too, that people come to you after being frustrated with doctors in terms of conversations with them about nutrition?
Right. All the time. And I'd say that most of that has to do with the lack of specificity in their feedback. In that one example, it was go lose weight, through whatever means necessary, was the implication. But their first, weight loss itself isn't something that I help clients with, because weight isn't really, the issue. We could talk about something more productive, more actionable, like let's reduce inflammation, let's improve gut health, let's improve, heart health, and look at a cholesterol panel. And those things are just more actionable. And I think that always, positioning clients to take action out of love instead of fear. So it's like, what can I do to show love, for my body, and reduce, fear of whatever, rejection, or fear of this certain food, or, fear of, maybe in this case, this client of mine, maybe her doctor made her feel fearful about her weight. So I do see that a lot. And I think women are ready for the conversation to change, and, for it to be more actionable, for it to be healthier, less toxic. Just so much judgment, and I think it does inspire that self-talk that a lot of us struggle with. And then, the guilt that we feel for all of the negative thoughts that we think about ourselves. But just like you said, where if we took a step back, we would see that those thoughts were fed to us by an industry that profits off of a lack of self-esteem. And I agree. Then the natural response is to be pretty angry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's healthy. That's a cool, like a freeing realization to have. And then, like, if we can let that anger sort of be a fire under us, that then helps us not only to, like, okay, now I'm really motivated to, like, learn to love myself, so I can, like, say, hey, screw you, system. That's telling me not to. And then it starts to spread too, right? There's a ripple effect, which is really exciting. Yeah,
I think, that anger is healthy. It's good to feel, that indignation, and it is a higher energy state, than, to feel apathetic or lack of empowerment. It's kind of like on your way to taking action, like you're saying. And I think, maybe in society as women, we're told that we shouldn't be angry, but I think it's okay.
Yeah. That's definitely another thing I've worked on in my own journey, because I had that internalized belief too, like, oh, I should just be quiet and peaceful. And the past couple of years, I've really turned towards, like, recognizing the anger that existed in my body and in my psyche, and, like, okay, it's okay. I can bring it up. I can release it. I can let people know when I'm angry. So
absolutely.
part of all that kind of work too.
Oh yes. Yeah. It's all part of that journey. Embracing the emotions that we feel and, like, trying to understand them. Yeah.
So going back to your question, is it okay if I have two other
Please, yeah.
Okay, so actionable strategies for resisting the system: documentary Embrace, reading the book Health at Every Size, and then I also recommend clearing out your social media feeds if you're on social media a lot, of anything related to the diet or beauty industry, anything when you're scrolling and you notice that twinge of not good enough, or I wish I looked like her, or I should, blah, 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 and replacing it with body positive accounts. health at every size accounts, bodies of all sizes and shapes and colors that are presented in a positive light. Because if we think about how many times we've seen the images of this very narrow, thin, young, pretty white woman, that's what beauty is, and that's what you're supposed to be like. We have to do a lot to start to counterbalance that. So if we could be intentional about seeking out those kinds of, that kind of media to expose ourselves to, over time, if we're seeing it every day, it really does start to, develop new neural pathways in our brain and release that old conditioning.
Yeah, I agree. It does seem intimidating. Again, same with like the intuition concept when you think about reprogramming your brain, redefining for yourself what you consider to be beautiful, versus having someone fill in that blank for you. But what you surround yourself with, and just that, like you're saying, the things that you let wash over you through social media or wherever, that's going to have a big impact.
Yeah. We really are a product of our society. So how can we change sort of what we're immersed in,
Yeah.
And then my last actionable, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that is kind of a blessing about social media, is that you do have some say over what you're exposed to, which is nice.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it has its pros and cons, but
right,
that's a pro.
I could think of a lot of cons, but we'll put that in the pro bucket.
Yeah. And then my last one is just a simple question of, if we notice ourselves start to feel not good enough, to take a breath and ask ourselves, who profits off of this emotion? And then the more we do that, and the more we're like, oh, that commercial with the girl with the perfect shiny hair on TV, like they're trying to profit off this emotion, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
If we start getting in the practice really of asking ourselves that question, every time we feel that way, it really helps to bring awareness to how pervasive and how insidious it really is, the industry is.
I think I'll write that on a Post-it note and put that in my bathroom or near my TV or something.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. Well, this has been so much fun for me, Annette. In case anyone who is watching this wants to connect with you or learn more about what it is that you do, where should they go?
So my website is AnnetteSloan.com. And on Facebook and Instagram, I'm at Annette Sloan Life Coach, although I don't post on either one of them very regularly, at least recently.
But when you do, it's good.
Oh, thank you. It fits in spurts. It's always my own journey with like how social media is affecting me too. Right. But you can find me in both of those places. And then I also, you mentioned earlier, I have a virtual book club called You Are the One You've Been Waiting For. And on March 4th, we're going to start reading this book called Nonviolent Communication, A Life. And I am so excited. It's really powerful. And it's all about being able to communicate, not only change our communication, but change our moralistic thinking and judgments so that we can change our self-talk and also change our communication. And just the impact it has for relationships, both personal and professional, is really profound. It's made a big difference in my life already. So I'm excited to read it with the book club. And if anybody seeing this would like to join us, then we always love new people.
Great. Awesome. That's so exciting. I can't wait to check that book out. I have not heard of that, but that sounds amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, great. And that's it then, I guess, for today's conversation. Thanks again so much, Annette, for joining me today. And thank you to all of you watching this for sharing this conversation with us.
Thank you, Britt. It's been so fun.
Thanks.